Today, by popular demand, I'm going to show you how you can transform this machine into this machine. But first, roll lame AI video intro. That's pretty lame, right? Okay, anyways, let's get on with it. So, this machine started its life as a GMWD multi-flight pendulum-loaded machine, which is one of the budget options on the market if you want to have a multi-flight machine without breaking your bank. But this machine has had some obvious issues with its design because, baby's got a bit of junk in the trunk. So what we're going to do is convert that machine to have its resistance come from a weight stack instead of that ridiculous pendulum design, which makes this machine take so much less space and much more convenient for a home gym. And what I don't understand is, why didn't they just do something like this design from the beginning? Even if they didn't make it a selectorized stack, they could have easily, made this just a plate-loaded vertical trolley instead of that pendulum. I don't get it. Anyways, let's just talk about how we make this machine better. So, things you're going to need. First, you're going to need the GMWD machine. Second, you're going to need to acquire a donor machine. What I mean by donor machine is a machine that comes with a decent stack that you can get for cheap or free. And then you're going to extract the useful parts of that machine, such as the stack, the selector shaft, the guide rods, pulleys, or any other structures that we find useful. And then we're going to graft them onto this machine. Now, since there are so many machines out there, your experience may vary a bit from mine. Now, on that topic, let's talk a bit about how to find the right donor machine. First, you're going to want to go cheap. So hit up Facebook Marketplace and see what's out there. A lot of the time, I see people just trying to get rid of these multi-purpose gym machines that were popular, 15, 20 years ago. And I'd recommend finding something that has at least a 200-pound stack. Generally, stay away from things that look rusty. And I also recommend staying away from those stacks that have the plastic shells around some kind of cement or sand. Those are generally not good. So look for iron or steel stacks. You may encounter several different machine types during your search. Again, there's the multi-gyms, which look something like this. And with these machines, you'll basically have to cut off the useful pieces, take out the stack, which is similar to the machine that I used for my conversion. In my case, it was a Tough Stuff machine that I think was about 15 or 20 years old. The other type of machines you'll encounter may be these that have an enclosure around the stack, like an arch. These would likely actually be easier to graft onto the machine because they already have all the structural members in place. You would basically just take off this arch with the stack and put it in the back of your machine, and then just figure out how to hook up the pulleys. These machines tend to be a bit more rare, though, and more expensive because generally they'll be part of some kind of a chest press or other single exercise and not one of these multi-gyms, so they're a bit harder to source. But generally, again, look for at least 200 pounds because the ratio on the machine when you have it all fully assembled will be about 8-to-1. So you don't want to end up with too small a stack for what you're going to need. The other thing you will probably need are some of these pulley kits, especially if you get one of the multi-gym donor machines where you don't have a convenient arch to house your stack and everything you need to get it to move. You're going to need some of these brackets that come as part of this kit, as well as some additional pulleys, probably at a minimum 2, probably 3. Now, I have a whole bunch of these laying around in my parts bin, and if you tinker a lot, you probably do too. Now, as you start to assemble your machine, you want to get to a point where you're about here, where the majority of the machine is assembled. You've got your trolley on, the uprights are assembled, you have some of the pulleys and cables, but you can leave the top cross member out because that's where we're going to have to do a bit of work to properly connect things to our stack. Now let's talk a bit about our donor stack and the parts that it's important to salvage. Now if you look in the bottom here, you'll notice that there's a piece here which I cut off from the original machine. And I'm using that because it already had the appropriately distanced holes for the guide rods so that they can have a stable base to stand on. Here's the other piece corresponding to that, which I've cut off from the top. So if we take this up to here, sorry, bear with me for a second because I'm trying to hold the camera while one hand doing this with the other hand. But here's the pieces. So you see how that fits on here nicely. And so the idea is we would then take this piece and kind of figure out how to attach this to the top upright, which again is not necessarily a super trivial task. Now, if you weren't able to reuse these pieces, or the machine design that you got the stack from just isn't conducive to that, it's easy to fabricate your own stays for your guide rods. All you have to do is pop off one of these plates and then put it on top of a piece of wood. Then simply draw an outline of the holes from one of the plates and use a spade drill bit to drill out the holes part of the way through. And then you can just use a piece of wood, whether it's just in the bottom or the top, in order to make sure your guide rods stay in place. So let me show you what that would look like. As you can see, that holds these guide rods in place just fine too. And then we can potentially, attach that to our top cross member when we're connecting this to the machine. So this is another option for how you can connect your guide rods. I recommend using a caliper to measure the size of your guide rods so that you know the right size of hole to drill in your pieces of wood. Now let's talk about this top cross member piece. Now, when you follow the original instructions, it tells you to mount it this way onto the machine. And then in the original design, there's a pulley here and a pulley here, and then the cable goes up and through these holes, which are blocked now around the pulley and down to the original pendulum. We're not going to be doing that. So as you can see, what I've done here is I've put a 1.75 inch by 1.75 inch piece of wood in here and in here, so that there's something stable to put screw in. And then I took this chunk of a 2x4 and basically bolted it onto the top, so we have this kind of a wooden beam going across here. Now, before, in my original design, which I am revising right now, I also drilled some holes here, and this is what I used to suspend my pulleys from, which is something that might work for you. And we'll talk a bit more about the pulley placement. In the latest revision that I'm doing now, for which I took the machine apart and I'm making this tutorial, we're going to be fabricating a more robust bracket for suspending the pulleys, as well as acting as the top kind of a post which stabilizes the guide rods. Anyway, the neat thing is you can reverse how you choose to mount this on the machine. So that's going to be useful depending on the height of the guide rods and the system you get, because this part is going to be critical to how we connect the machine to our new stack. Now, when working with the stack, if you want to make any changes to it once it's been assembled, like change the base, trim the height, or anything like that, unfortunately, it is a huge pain in the butt. And you just have to take all of the stack pieces off and put them back on. Now, the part that I'm using to build my bracket and pulley suspension system from is actually from this landmine that I had lying around. It just happens to have the perfect dimensions and pre-drilled holes where the pulleys can go, and then I can attach the chopped off part of the machine to it to create the top part of my stack. Now, I had to make a couple of more alterations to this part that came off of the machine to accommodate for that landmine bracket. So I'm cutting out this little notch here so that the built-in nut can fit through here, and I can join the two parts together. Always wear eye protection whenever you're using power tools, and I'd also recommend wearing a face mask or respirator because those little metal filings can go everywhere. And a shop vac is obviously pretty useful to clean up when you're done. And while we watch this Dremel montage, I'd really appreciate it if you could drop me a like and a subscribe, as it really helps out new YouTube channels like mine and helps YouTube promote it to more viewers and helps my channel grow. So really appreciate it. And we get in there with a file to smooth out any rough edges. So that's going to connect to that piece like that. Now I'm going to enlarge that hole a bit so that I can fit an M10 bolt through it and connect to that threaded piece at the bottom. Doing this on my world's dinkiest drill press, which is still better than no drill press. All right, now a moment of truth. Here's the kind of ugly hole we made, but we don't care. Let's see how that fits on top of our pulley suspender. Ta-da! So this is just the bolt I put in here to test the alignment. Now, this piece has another through and through hole here. So what we're gonna do is mark where to drill another 10mm hole through there. We'll use a center punch to mark that and drill another hole here. So we have 2 points where this will bolt together, and that's gonna be really solid. So again, this will be our guide rod holder to which we'll attach this part that is going to be our pulley suspension system, so that when the system is under load, those pulleys will ultimately transfer the load onto this guide rod holder, and then that load will go down onto the guide rods as structural members. And so, a million years later, drilling our guide rod slash pulley holder component is now fabricated. So there's what that looks like. You've got 2 bolts holding that on. That should take a lot of load. These are M10 bolts. So this thing isn't going anywhere. Nice. Okay, now let's attach our pulley hangers to our newly fabricated part. So I'm going to be using these kind of silly eye bolts because these are the shortest M10 screws that I could find. And the other benefit is I don't really need to hold the top because here, as you will see, when you put them in here, this will just prevent them from rotating. So I don't even need to tighten from both ends. So let's attach our pulley holders here. Yeah. Just gonna take this, take our lock nut, haha, look at that. All right, now an important thing to note here, which we'll go over, is remember the guide rods will be going into these holes here, and the pulleys are here. And so when this is set up, the point is for the cables to go exactly between the guide rods as they go to the stack. So that's why this part was such a convenient find, because it already had these holes drilled right here. So when the pulleys are installed, that's going to put the cables in just about the right spot to be in the middle of the stack. Okay, now that we've done kind of our rough fitting and our fabrication, the next step is to mock everything up without putting things on permanently, and then see how things align and where we might need to drill some additional holes to connect the stack to the machine. So this is where some of these pins, your typical selector pins, come in handy, because you can just use these instead of bolts to just kind of fit everything together. So that's what I'm going to do in order to attach this cross member here to the machine. Here, here, and we're going to do one more on the other side, and that should be good for now. All right, that'll hold that in place just to let us kind of test everything out. Okay, now we've got our guide rods. Let's put those on there. And we'll just lean them up against the machine like that. Okay, now for the fun part, let's see how this guy aligns with everything else. Okay, not bad. I think all we really need to do now is just drill another hole through this piece of wood. Maybe we'll put some kind of shim in here because, you know, it's off maybe by about 1/2 of an inch here in order for it to be flat. And, you know, that might just do it. Now, an important point I want to illustrate is see how these guide rods are resting up against the top of this metal piece right here. Again, the angle isn't ideal here, so I'm going to shim it such that it's kind of flat and straight. But the whole point of doing that is so that these guide rods become a structural member, and that the load for when we're lifting the weight gets transferred, you know, down onto these guide rods and into the floor, so that we're not, you know, torquing this whole piece down as we're lifting the weight. Okay, now that we have an idea for how things will line up, the next thing we want to do is actually add some of the stack components in so we can test it. Now, obviously we don't want to put the whole stack together, but what we'll do is we'll put the rubber shims in there, we'll put the bottom plate, and we'll put the selector shaft plate so that we have the estimation for how tall the stack is, and that will allow us to see, you know, the length of our cable, and then figure out, you know, if we need to make any adjustments, whether we need to set the stack higher, lower, or do some creative stuff on the cable in order to get everything to connect properly. Okay. Now we're going to put the pin through the bottom hole of the plate so that the height of the stack is the same as when it's assembled. Now let's run our cable through and see how everything lines up. Okay, so now everything is mocked up and hooked up. Let's see how it works. So we have basically 5 plus 15, 20 pounds loaded on the machine, and we pull up on the handle. Look at that, our stack sliding up, and we feel resistance on the handle. Not bad. Okay, now that we have an idea for the final design, I'm going to start moving some of these components closer to where the machine is going to be in its permanent location, which is closer to the wall. Now, another reason that you want to put this next to a wall is that because the stack is just freestanding on the floor, its weight is not weighing down the machine and therefore not adding to the stability of the machine. So we're going to need to attach the top of the machine to the wall with a wall mounting bracket. I'm just using a bookshelf bracket in order to attach the machine, but that's really going to add sufficient stability to the machine so that it doesn't wobble during use, especially under heavy load. Alrighty. Okay, so now we've got our stack assembled again, and you should always grab a level and see if you need to make any adjustments to the stack. Now, if it's a little crooked, there's a couple of ways we can address this. We can try shimming it a bit, but hopefully when we attach it to the upper part, we can bind it to the rack here and make sure everything is aligned, or shift the machine a little bit just to do kind of our final alignments and make sure everything is level. Okay, now the machine's really starting to come together. So we've attached our top guide rod holder and pulley suspension system, nudged the machine around to make this as level as possible. So we got our level here. We want to make sure it's level from every angle. And if it's not, you can just nudge the machine back and forth a little bit until you get the alignment just right. So now let's throw our pulleys on. And I always recommend putting some silicone lube onto your pulleys before you install them, whether you're doing an upgrade project or installing a new machine, and also do the same for your guide rods. Now, the last tricky thing to do is to get your cable tension just right. So there's a number of things you can do. One, depending on the stack design, you see there's this really long screw here, so I can potentially use that to fine tune the amount of tension that's going to be on the cable. Other tricks you can do are you can change the diameter of some of the pulleys. If you use a smaller diameter pulley, like here, you can basically lengthen the cable by shortening the amount that loops around the pulley. Or if you use a larger diameter pulley, like this one, again, you can effectively lengthen the cable that wraps around it and therefore tighten the cable. So I'm going to like things to be nice and tight. So let's try and see if this big one will fit here. And this is what it looks like up top now. Here's our wall mounting bracket. I've kind of hinged it off this other bracket, just torqued it all down. Doesn't really need to be super tough because it just adds some stability for when it gets shaky. And that's it. So let's do the full stack test again and see how the stability is. All right, here we go. Nice. Rock solid. And now that we've done a little bit of cleanup in our Drem, here's what the final product looks like from the side view as we do some lateral raises to test it out. Not bad for a day's worth of work. If you enjoyed watching this video, I'd really appreciate it if you drop me a like and a subscribe, because it really helps with the YouTube algorithm and helps it put the video in front of more people, which keeps me motivated to put out more videos like this. Thanks a lot.